I'm happy to say that we're here to celebrate, I think, Stacy's wonderful exhibition. It's a wonderful thing to celebrate 23 collections in this show. And as Stacy has said, you know, both spoken and written, that it's all about showing people how great a snapshot can be. And so this is a wonderful sort of selection of highlights from these 23 collections. And we're lucky enough to have 5 of the collectors here today. And I'm excited to ask them many questions about their collections. And just to give a brief sort of commentary on snapshots in general, the term snapshot began as a hunting term, and it was sort of this idea of literally, you know, shooting, or, you know, a quick snap, a quick shot. And so it quickly was adopted later, particularly after Kodak's invention of a, you know, Brownian snapshot cameras. And I won't go too much into the technology of things, but thanks to photographic technology, we now have a long history of many different kinds of snapshots. And it is a wonderful part of the photographic medium because it is, you know, private and personal and can be amateur or professional. And I think that everyone here, you know, all of us up here have different reasons that we're drawn to snapshots. And so I will start by not talking too much, but maybe we'll start down here with Nigel. If you could, I wanted to maybe have everyone first talk about why they collect snapshots and whether their specific collection has a focus or a type of organization or not at all. And sort of what you're looking for in a snapshot.
Oh my God, if I could answer that question coherently. Why I collect snapshots? I think I've always collected images, and I think photography has always been like for many, many years, a sort of passion of mine, and snapshots were essentially begun as a cheap way of building a photographic collection that I could really relate to. Subsequently, those initial impulses have developed into something, I think, much more diverse. I think the whole snapshot genre is so wonderfully eclectic, and the impulse behind purchasing a snapshot is as varied as the impulse to shooting a snapshot itself from a photographer. So it's very difficult to pin down exactly what I'm looking for, but I tend to gravitate towards images that ask questions, or images that are not immediately apparent what they are of, or images that are slightly disturbing, perhaps, or graphically interesting. And they're categorized in all sorts of ways. I collect a much broader swathe than just snapshots, because I also collect vernacular photography and some other photography as well. So it's a small part of a much larger conversation. But I'll end there for the moment.
Okay, and we'll have Bill answer the same.
So my way in on this was as a collector of more resolved, authored images. And there is actually an epiphany photograph in the collection. There was a snapshot that had been done by a college girlfriend, and wonderful picture, and for the longest time it sat in the drawer because it didn't have the legitimacy of the other parts of the collection. And the big collection that's known are pictures of people in which you can't see their eyes. So it always had a very singular theme. There are lots of ways that picture can show up. But I had this one photograph from the Minnesota State Fair, 1967, a picture of a woman with a pillowcase on her head and a sign that says, "Color TV radiation turns girl into monster," which I thought was just the strangest. So I was afraid it would get lost because it was in the drawer, so I had it matted. It still lived in the drawer. And then I thought, you know, this is a great picture. So I brought it out and put it up. And then people would go, "Oh, what's this?" And I would say, "Garry Winogrand." Because if I'd said who it actually was, no one would go like, "Oh, that's nobody." But Gary Winograd, they go, oh my God, that's great. They don't, nobody knows. And then I finally copped to who it actually was and gave it its own pride of place. And as a collector, things kept getting more and more expensive, and you go, well, it's like drugs. You go, well, I still got to get some drugs. And so I started buying snapshots, and all within the theme, and it's crazy. There are pictures all put away in various places, and that's what it is. So I'm also not much of a on my hands and knees going through boxes kind of guy. I do believe in the finder's fee when a dealer comes to you and says, this photograph, which was free, is now $40. And you go, that's fine. You saved me from crawling around on the floor. So
Okay. That's great.
Well, that's a great segue because I love crawling around on the floor looking for a snapshot. And I'm a dealer mostly, but I started collecting probably 5 years ago, and I've been dealing in photos, all types of photos, but primarily snapshots. And I started collecting, there's a back room, some of you may have been in there at Dick's, and it's somebody named Dick, as long as it's written or on the image. But I collect early color photos. I have a nice collection of that. In fact, Mark said to me about a year ago, I never see you list color photos anymore. And I said, that's because I'm collecting them. So, you know.
The secret's out.
Yeah. On to you, Ronnie boy.
I'm one of the people digging in the boxes at 3:30 in the morning at the flea market.
Yeah.
You're asleep, I'm finding good things. I like snapshots because they're moments. They're just beautiful moments in time. They're those moments when they're captured and you're going through a box and you find that one thing that makes you happy. That's the perfect little moment. And it's almost like a drug, a dopamine release, a little high that you get when you, ooh yeah.
Yeah.
You can set that down. To me, that's what it's all about.
And you know you have a really great one if you get that high every time you look at it.
That's very true.
And I'm very thankful to people like you two who are down on your hands and knees, because I wish I had more time to do that. But part of the thrill for me is the hunt. And I enjoy going through the boxes myself when I have time. It's as though we're curators in a way. We look at lots and lots of images. We select those that sing to us, and sometimes they sing better if they're coupled with other images. So what I do is put together a collection, mostly of standalone images. We talked about subject matter collecting, and there are a lot of people who collect by subject matter. I tend not to, although every now and then I look at my collection and realize that I've fallen into that trap. But for me, it is the moment in time that's captured, that's a special moment. I hate to say it's a decisive moment, but I too, like Nigel, collect fine art photography as well as vernacular photography and art. So it's the visual that really grabs me, and snapshots, as others at the table have said, are affordable and accessible, and that's what makes it fun. The other thing is that to some extent they're being trashed all over the world, and sooner or later there aren't going to be many left. And somewhere recently I heard that of the 100,000 pictures a day that people take now, very few were printed. So we're fortunate that for decades before we came along, people were saving this stuff, and that's provided us with the fodder for our collections.
I should also add that you and I both have said something about affordable, but if you buy enough snapshots, they cease to become that affordable. They stack up pretty quickly.
Right. And I appreciate hearing some of these comments about accessibility, or the question of legitimacy, which I think we can maybe talk further about a little bit later. But one thing I did want to pick up, and I agree entirely, Mark, on the fact that today the amount of photographs that are taken per day, is absolutely sort of an unfathomable number. And I recommend you all look at photographs of a contemporary artist's installation where he actually took a 24-hour period and printed up every single photograph that was posted online through Facebook or other sites, or Flickr, and so this is Eric Kessel's, and it's literally a room like this filled with these prints. But I think one of the reasons why this exhibition and other snapshot exhibitions are particularly interesting right now is that we are seeing sort of, I don't want to say it, but sort of the dying art of this type of snapshot, the physical, photograph, some that can be fit into your wallet or that you're going to handle and have, around the house, because we've all got our phones and we've all got all of these same wonderful types of moments, but that no longer are physically tangible, where you can look at both sides of the photograph and you can, sort of really engage with it. And so that actually is my next question for everyone is, in this wonderful hunt and sort of act of collecting and appreciating the visual images in these snapshots, how do you ever, and for each of you, I'm sure it'll be very different, but do you seek out the original context of some of these photographs? Do you ever do research on them, or what is your way of engaging with them? Is it purely, putting it on the wall from time to time? Do they sit in boxes? And do you find one where you're like, I have to figure this out, or do you try to date them? Do you sort of
for me, very occasionally. I'm essentially not much interested in the historical nature of the image as a historical object. Very occasionally something will happen where I'll say, oh, what is that, or do some research. But essentially for me, the focus is largely on the image and the narrative that evokes for me internally. So, and most of mine are not on the wall, just because I have so many and I don't have enough walls. I keep them in boxes. I keep them largely thematically, because what you find, especially if you look back even to the very origins that you mentioned of snapshots, I have some very early Kodak albums, Kodak #2 albums, which were from 1898, I think, or 80, and you'll see genres of photography or genres of the snapshot of the sort of domestic image that you see repeated right until the 1970s and 1980s. And I actually think the thing that you mentioned about contemporary photography and how the world is filled with digital snapshots, I think what we do with snapshots is actually quite radically different now to what we did pre-digital age. I think the way we take photographs is different. The notion of the selfie is so very utterly different from the notion of the other and how somebody took a picture of an other. The fact that you can see immediately what is on your digital camera and edit it is very different from hoping the image that you took will capture a moment that you then wait a week or 2 days or an hour even just to get back. So I think the way we look at things is very, very different. So that's a long digression. The short answer is they're in boxes, they tend to fall into categories, but not, I don't seek out categories like Mark, except in occasional, very occasional circumstances. But largely I'm not really interested in the historical context as a historical artifact, though emotionally I might be, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It all made sense. I don't, I'm very interested in the why. Why did somebody save this photograph? Because the enigma of the image is what stirs me up. I want the story to change each time I look at it. The more straight the picture is in terms of, oh, this is Jenny's birthday, is not, that would take me out of the picture. If it's a picture of Jenny with her eyes closed, of course, blowing out the candles, and it's a little out of focus, and there's some flair behind it, and it's dog-eared, I'm your man. I like the object. I like one of the things we can talk about is how do you, in a situation like this, Stacey and I talked about this, and how do you present them so that snapshots have an immediacy that other forms of photography don't have. Although I will say that the cell phone is a whole new ballgame. The enigma, once upon a time I had this Weston in my collection, this great picture of Neil sleeping, and one of the Weston grandsons said, "Oh, you know, my grandfather used to get migraine headaches." And I went, "Well, thanks for ruining that." It had a much stronger life with me before I knew what it was. So I tried to forget it.
So sometimes better not to know.
No.
But in albums, old albums, people didn't throw away any photos. So you had mistake photos in there, you had, you know, took a photo by mistake, things that nowadays we just erase it right away. They kept everything, every photo was precious to them. And this pile of snapshots that's over here on the table, we're going to have a event here where you write a story about what happened in that photo. Because to me, every picture tells a story, and there was something happening in that, and sometimes you just get this feeling about it. I love when I get a feeling about a photo like that, and sometimes you don't, but there you go.
Sometimes it's fun as hell to research the backstory of what you have and what you own. Because the backstory changes everything sometimes. I mean, there's some photos up on the wall of Vivian Maier, and I think that's probably a prime example of it. Another example would be writing on the back. You'll see the simplest photo in the world, and then you look at read on the back, hit in the head with a bat, 1943. You just start shaking your head. There's so much that you could read into it. A little bit of research will open up so many things to the photographs.
Same question?
Same question.
Well,
Any part of it. How do you live with your photographs?
I have been collecting photographs for more than 40 years, and because it's a fluid thing, you take them and you, as Nigel said, you store them away. And I had the good fortune of having heart surgery a few years ago, and it gave me some time off. And during that period, I went back through about 5,000 photographs for the first time, since I had the collection, trying to cull out the ones that I thought were the strongest images. And that experience was really wonderful. And I actually started mounting them on boards with corners in sleeves and archival boxes. And I've done about 1,000 that way. And I store them that way, but I store basically by age and period. Not by subject matter or any other way. So I start with Kodak 1s and 2s in a box, and I have real photo postcards, and then I have, of course, we all have subcategories of things we collect. One thing I love is amateur pornography, and we don't see any on the wall here. For me, that started when Polaroid came out with a camera in the late 40s, 1950. And suddenly people who were never able to do that kind of thing because the photographs went to Rochester or to their druggist or somewhere, were able to take these photographs at home and keep them. And those people have been dying lately. So there's really a good cache of that stuff around, and it's remarkable material. But I also, another thing I like that I keep in a separate category of photomatics, which are little frame photographs that came out of a machine that was mostly popular during the 40s and 50s, or late 30s, 40s, 50s. And it started with metal frames and went to cardboard frames during the war, and then plastic frames after the war. The reason I like those is that they're self-portraits, essentially. And so you get some remarkable self-portraits out of photo booths or photomatic machines. And so we all have different categories, and we store them differently. Like Nigel, there's just not enough wall space. And I have a wife.
So I have one more question that I would love for each of you to answer, and then I have some other sort of more general questions where we can all discuss together. So the question I want to ask is, if each of you, I would love to just hear a story either about like today, what your favorite photograph is and why, or whether it was the hunt, or just a story about either a discovery or a particular, you know, we heard a little bit from Bill, but, you know, something about, and it might be a photograph that's here or not, but just a story about one of the actual objects.
Well, I'm not going to mention one of mine that's on the wall, but this is something that made me think of it, I think, when Ron mentioned something. I bought a photograph quite recently, within the last 6 months, I think, and it was a pretty average-looking photograph of an old African-American guy reading, I think it was a magazine or something, or it wasn't quite clear, a magazine or a newspaper, sort of sitting up against, he was in profile, sitting up against you know, a sort of humble house of some kind. There were some other people in the background. It was kind of compellingly put together, but it wasn't any special image per se in and of itself. And I almost kind of like dismissed it, and then I turned it around, and on the back was written, "Dad learning to read." And the power of that was kind of shocking to me at the time. It really like took my breath away. I mean, and now it remains one of the most memorable images I have, because what seemed like a kind of sort of nice, interesting, unforgettable image suddenly assumed this kind of resonance of this 80 or 85-year-old man with, you know, a comic book or something. It was kind of heartrending, and I think that's an image that stuck with me that I bought recently, meaning in the last 6 months or something. Mm-hmm. But I think I think what develops favorites, and I think for the people who are collectors here and in the audience, that as your eye develops and as you see and go through more and more visual imagery and snapshots, your tastes change, and you become more discerning, and you begin to learn and you begin to discover things that you never imagined when you started out on the journey. So when I look back at images that I bought when I was just starting out 12 years ago, I'm like, why did I buy that? Or, yeah, I could see that, but it holds no real pull for me now, whereas images that I might have just missed earlier.
Send them to me.
Images that are just like, oh my god, that is so amazing. And I mean, every collector's images here, there is certainly, I would say, at least from every collector, there's one image that is just like really, you can really read into it, and it becomes a real favorite. And I think some images you like because they're funny, some images you like because they have sort of an ironic je ne sais quoi to them. Some of them can just be beautiful, gorgeous, inadvertent art images. I mean, there's endless variations, and I think that's part of the attraction.
Mm-hmm. So for me, it's the existential buzz in the picture. If I had to pick a picture in the show, there's a woman on a swing with dark glasses, which is probably, that's a good picture for me. I'll tell a story about a dinner that was all these photo people at a rare event where people actually got to sit around and talk afterwards, and we were talking about the moment when people decided that when people realized that photography had changed their life. And there was a young woman who is an administrator at the School of Visual Arts, and she told the story of finding this Polaroid of her father. This is about the back of photographs. And it was a picture of her father who died when she was a little girl. And they turned it over, she turned it over, and it was written, "This is the last picture of Jim before he died. Jenny took at age 7. Jenny again. But that moment was, for me, electrifying, that there was this moment in time when her life had changed from a photograph. And so I actually started soliciting responses from mostly photographers. Is there a moment when your appreciation of photography and the power it might have for you personally, when did it change? And it's been the survey has been exciting and disappointing, and many, many different responses.
Do you want to give any examples?
All I can think of is Gene Richards, who I think is just the greatest documentary photographer working in the United States. His answer was his mother gave him a camera. I went like, no, you gotta, come on, it's gotta be like Joel Peter Whitkins about the severed head rolling down the street. I was looking for that, but So you get a range of things. I do think there was no Henry twist to the story that her mother had to take a second job to pay for the camera, but that's...
Okay, that's great.
Boy, there's so many that's fairly hard to pick. But one of the photos from my collection that's on the wall over there, it's a color photo from 1950, an early Kodachrome, and it's just, you can feel like the hot breeze on your back and hear the crickets, and I just feel like I could put myself in the picture, and that makes it beautiful and wonderful to me. And I also like when people send me dicks. Like somebody sent, I call them doorstep dicks because people know I collect dicks now, and they send them to me, and it's wonderful. Just had to add that. All right.
I sent her a dick recently.
It's Valentine's Day.
And here you are.
I'd like to answer your survey first. There's, I collect photos of people on plastic-covered couches. We grew up with plastic-covered couches, and that noise made when you sit down in the summer when you're wearing shorts and you're sweaty, and it's like, this is fun.
That's great.
And I just kind of realized that they just kept piling up, and I ended up with a really large collection of them. So if you guys would mind sending me plastic-covered couches.
And then do you put them in plastic sleeves? Just
Exactly.
Perfect.
The moments, to me, I'm going to relate a weird little quick story. I got a call from a friend, Don. His name is Mr. Modern. Now, he's a big antiques collector. He says, I got a lot of photos for you. Get your ass over here. So I drive over. There's boxes and boxes and boxes. I said, what do you want for all this? He's like, give me 3 bills. I go, okay. Throw it all in. Don't even look at the stuff because there's so much of it. I'm driving along, gives me a call, says, you really need to look at this. I said, why? He says, I just looked at the proof sheets. I said, I thought you sold me everything. He says, I got the proof sheets. I'm like, okay, great. Pull over, first thing I pull out is Aaron Siskin. Next one, I pull out a photo of Harry Callahan. I'm going, who is this? Long story short, this was a student who went to the Institute of Design from 50 to 54, studied under Siskin and Callahan, and I have his entire archive, the whole 9 yards. He shot 8,000 photos in 4 years.
Wow.
He was on the streets with Richard Nickel, Ishimoto, everybody and their brother that went to the Institute of Design. So I got a hold of the family. We're going to do a little share with the copyright, but those are the moments. That's the magic that can really happen when you find like an archive like that or something really special, or just that little photo with that writing on the back, Dad learning to read. It's the special moments that just hit you.
It's like Hubert's Freaks, a book written by Greg Gibson about,
great book. Read that book.
About a picker finding a cache of Diane Arbus photographs. It's a wonderful book.
It ends tragically.
Yeah. By the time we get to this
I know,
end of
what
the
is
table,
The pressure is on, Mark.
I would just add a couple things. Stacy reminded me when she was talking about the richness of the Kodachrome. I think that for all of us probably, memory really informs, and often our relationship to an image bears a direct relationship to something in our past. And sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it speaks pretty loudly. And so often I find myself attracted to those images. But I'll just talk about one of my images here. It's a photograph of a black nanny holding a white baby, and the black nanny is in the shadows and barely visible except for her hand on the white baby's clothing. And first of all, it reminded me of the hidden mother photographs that a lot of people collect, photographs that required the mother to be present when the child's picture was being taken because the exposure time was so long that they had to be sure that the child wouldn't move. So the mother usually had something shrouded over her so that she wasn't seen. I don't know why it couldn't have been a hidden father, but the assumption is there was always a hidden mother. So that photograph reminded me a little bit of the hidden mother thing, but there's a whole racial thing that also was important to me. And I think that image has so much going on. At first blush, it doesn't, but for me, I found it very meaningful.
That's great, thank you. So my other questions are a little more general, and I'd love for each of you to pipe up. And the first one, in fact, just thinking about some of the categories that have been mentioned, whether it's a humorous photograph or hidden mother. I would love to hear from you in all of your searches, whether it's in the United States or elsewhere. Do you see a distinct, I don't want to say style, but are there specific characteristics in, for example, American snapshots versus European, and what are those, and do you specialize in one or the other or all? Really
well, I want to say something
large,
that is just sort of, is that I think what's really interesting to me is that, I hope I'm not making too much of a blanket statement, but I would say for 98%, if not more, of actual snapshots were utilitarian in purpose when they were made. There was an idea behind it that was actually very specific, largely memorial. I want to capture this moment. I want to capture my newborn. I want to capture this landscape. And I think what is unique about collecting snapshots is that what we as collectors do is that we actually remove that image, for the most part, from the original context. So it becomes divorced of its original utilitarian purpose, like I want to show the world what Jimmy at the age of 4 does, and it becomes Jimmy at 4 and this image of this child, which we then impose a curatorial gaze onto. And that to me is very exciting as a collector, because you are endowing meaning on an object that is generally completely and utterly divorced from its original intention. And it's a very different process, I think, from looking at art photography, photojournalism to a degree. I mean, it's a very, very different way of looking. But to answer your question, I think we would all agree that there's a huge difference between American and certainly European photography. Part of it is economic. You tend to find that the European photography tends to be tiny little images, but there's also, what's more important, I think, is the spirit, that there is a performative joy to early American snapshot photography, which I don't think you find as much in European snapshot photography, where there's more of a formality, more of a sort of button-downness, not completely, but these are broad generalizations. But I think there's definitely a distinct difference between European, and I can't talk really of Asian snapshot photography or whatever, than there's of American. I'm kind of eclectic. I will take any photograph that's good. I don't care where it comes from.
It is a funny thing, though, if you go, this is my experience, if I look at my family photographs, none of them are worth saving.
That's why we collect photography, because our own snapshots are terrible.
No, they're just, I don't find multiple readings. I just go like, oh yeah, I know that.
Because you know that person.
So, but God forbid you should throw them away. So.
Well, I sell abroad a lot, and I find that the European collectors that are buying from me have told me I want American photos, not European photos. And I went to France 5 years ago, and I bought a box of snapshots with me to show to some of the people. They were like, you couldn't find 3.5 by 3.5 color photos in Europe. They want it was American, and that's what they're looking for. So.
Americans are whimsical. They have a lot of fun with the camera. I mean, the camera is almost like a toy. Whereas, to me, when I see the European photographs, it's a very utilitarian thing. And we get zany with the camera. I mean, seriously, folks, there's some crazy photos out there. When you look at the European collections, they're very much more like, take the dumb picture, So I think there's a lot more happiness in the American photos, and it translates. Americana, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? It's a roadside attraction this big.
I echo everybody's comments about this. There's a playfulness to American photography that doesn't seem to be present in the world of European snapshots. And I've actually shopped for this stuff in Italy and France and Germany, and it's really hard to find.
Very difficult.
But I think that Europeans, for the most part, were better photographers than Americans. They actually compose their images better. They seem to be more patient, and ours seem to be more spontaneous. We also, you don't see a lot of double exposures in Europe. You don't see a lot of blurry images or mistakes or that kind of stuff. Maybe they threw them away, but I think also in the United States, the snapshot camera and processing was cheaper and more available, and so people weren't quite as concerned about taking too many pictures or pictures of silly things.
I think there's also a zeitgeist. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I love it when you interrupt me.
I think there's also a zeitgeist thing that's happening. I think in Europe you have something, I mean, like if you talk about snapshots from like the tail end of the 19th century to 1950, 60, I mean, obviously it continues today, but if you look, a lot of these images are from black and white images from the 30s, 40s, maybe 50s, but you're dealing with, in Europe, you're dealing with a very different mindset. You're dealing with World War I, World War II, the decimation of World War II. You're dealing with a very different economic set of structures, whereas the 20th century, in essence, in the Western world, is like the American century. I mean, just now, and it was full, despite the problems, it was also full of an enormous amount of enthusiasm and optimism about the world, technology, all those things. And I think those are reflected in the notion of the American dream and the notion of what America could be, which is reflected in the imagery. Whereas Europe is coming out of a battered, it doesn't have the same zeitgeist going on in that 100 years. And additionally, then it's dealing with war and trauma and deprivation. And I think that's reflected very much economically in what happens, but also in the kind of way Europeans saw popular imagery.
And
no. Ironically, 35mm photography and the movement of the camera and point of view comes from Europe.
Correct.
But it would be revealing to discover where that came from. Where did the notion of overhead photography come from, or all the Bauhaus stuff? I have no idea. But it is an idea that made much more sense in Americans' crazy hands than this more studied, formulaic approach to it.
But like like communism as well would play into the whole Bauhaus thing, that it's coming out of like the sort of philosophical idea of what's happening.
Well, also as a technical thing, suddenly you had a lightweight camera.
Right, and you could move around.
Move around,
I
yeah.
mean, you know,
A good lightweight camera.
Yeah, exactly.
Good like a camera, which we all want. Okay.
And
Can I ask you a question?
please.
This came up at lunch a little bit, and it's the thing that I asked museum people, and I asked Stacy how she was sorting through how do you present snapshots. Not only, specifically for me, I want to do a book, and I've never seen a book on snapshots that worked for me. And maybe it's not a book, maybe it's actually online is the platform for it. So there are two things, presenting snapshots, the platforms for snapshots in a situation like this that's three-dimensional, or as books or as websites or however. I did a show in Katona once at the Katona Museum, and I wasn't going to be able to organize it. And the curator said, how do you want to present them? And I said, in a shoebox. And she went, what do you mean? I said, what's hard about that? That's where they are. They're in a shoebox. Let's just put them all on a table in a shoebox, and people come and look at them, put them back, and that's the show. This, of course, was totally unacceptable. And when I went to see the installation, I begged, I said, please don't put them in 8-ply mats in little gold frames. I went to the opening, and that's what I got. And it just was a recontextualization of the photographs that I think they suffered from. I'm thrilled to see Stacy's table. This is where you touch them and eat them and steal them. And
No, I'm glad you bring up the question of how to present these, and this was actually one of my larger questions. What is the role of the internet and snapshots today? Because as I, brought up the fact that these actual physical snapshots exist less and less. And so how are you all reconciling the role of the internet with your snapshots? I know some of you have websites, but indeed the question of, is the internet the right platform? Is it a book? Is it a museum? I think that this is sort of an an exciting time to think about what is the way for these snapshots to be shared.
Well,
whether,
you're going
you know,
through it at the MFA
Yes.
right now.
Yeah, so we're preparing an exhibition that will open in early summer, and it is highlights from Peter Cohen's collection, who has some photographs here and is unfortunately not with us here today. But we have really been thinking a lot and talking with our design team and our whole photo team about what are, we're talking about specific groupings that reflect Peter's way of collecting. And we've, will we mat them? Will we? The one thing we know is that all of the borders, you'll definitely be able to see. And, I appreciate your comment about the dog-eared photograph. Those are the photographs that I love too, or with the writing on it. For me, the snapshots that are, one of the things about snapshots that I like is the life of the actual snapshot. Of course, there's the story and the life of the people in the photograph, but the actual, how many hands was this in, whose pocket was it in, why was it ripped out of the album, all of the traces of the actual photograph, where has it been, why is the pen smudged, why are there two different handwritings on it, was it sent here, all of those things are hard to actually show when you put them on the walls. They need to be in a shoebox, which is a hard thing to do in a museum or gallery setting.
No kidding.
Yeah. Well, that's like Ransom Riggs had a book that came out, Talking Pictures, and all of them had writing on the front or the back. And as I think one of you said before, the writing makes the photo more interesting sometimes. Yeah, I love writing, and then you can feel the love that went into it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's,
I think-
it has a lot.
I think the problem with snapshots is that they are intimate objects, essentially. They're there to be held in your hand or looked, they're essentially small-scale moments. And yet, some of their power is about seeing the image, and in order to make that powerful, you have to blow them up. And I don't quite know how to negotiate that. And I think seeing them I have a website which I haven't updated in hundreds of years, but basically I have a website, and I actually enjoy looking at the images I have on that website, because I get to see them kind of slightly larger than I would if they were in actuality. I have an image up there, a very small image of sort of a blurry woman leading a sheep around for some reason. It's a bizarre image. But if you look, Stacy created some calendars, and she has used that image from my collection as one of the images. And it's a whole different experience seeing it in the calendar where it's that big to seeing it on the wall when it's that big.
Mm-hmm.
I think digitally is a good way to see them, but then you lose the materiality of the object.
Mm-hmm. And I'll let you say something in a minute, but I wanted to say I agree with you entirely and have the same sort of mixed feelings about going from the very small, wonderful, precious, intimate object to then seeing it at a larger scale. But I recently saw two exhibitions in Paris, and both of them use digital technology in interesting ways, which sort of opened my mind about using digital to further, appreciate snapshots. One exhibition was, actually, I hope that you saw it because it was about the enigma of photography. It was, every photograph is an enigma. And it was a wonderful collection of amateur, forgotten, unpublished photographs. And we can talk further about the details of it, but one of the things that struck me in the exhibition was the use of some tactile screens where you could actually blow up some of the original photographs that you saw on the walls, but you could physically engage with them and actually look at some of the detail, which really felt like it was, all of photography is about technology and different kinds of technology, so to really have this, tactile screens and a digital presence in the gallery was incredibly successful, I thought. And the other exhibition that was up at the same time was called Found Photographs, and it was all in individual frames, but not gold. They were wooden frames, and so that was a couple of the rooms. And then there were two other rooms where they had blown up some of the photographs, which initially sort of makes you, where are the edges, where are all of the little details and all of this intimacy. But things like double exposures, all of a sudden to see them blown up through our contemporary technology, it really brought the photographs to a whole other dimension. I mean, it brought them to life in a very different way, and to have that sort of complementary way of looking at them. At a museum, it's something we think about a lot. How can we display these and respect the sort of initial life of the object, but also invite people in to look at it in different ways? So I don't know if you all have any comments about the internet or digital technology and its connection or disconnection from Snapchat.
Nigel's done a wonderful job with his website, which is
Foundphotographs.com.
Photographs.com or whatever. And he has a wonderful soundtrack that goes with the images. And I think that it's a great way to present photographs. A lot of people have websites with their snapshots, but of the sites, I think Nigel's is one of the best.
Thank you.
And I would be curious, back to your question, Bill, about how to display these, to hear your thoughts, in the past 10 years or so, and maybe much longer than that, but particularly the past 10 years, there have been multiple museum exhibitions of snapshots. Some are very specifically linked to one collection, others might be thematic. And, I heard a couple of you mentioning your thoughts about the National Gallery exhibition in 2007 of Robert Jackson's exhibition. And I would love to hear, to sort of hear as snapshot collectors, your perspective on museum exhibitions of snapshots, whether, how you sort of view them.
Well, as a collector, museums should be buying entire collections from collectors.
No self-interest there, am I right, Ron? That was completely unbiased, isn't it?
And what about the actual? So what is successful in a museum exhibition?
Well,
after we bought them all of the collections.
I also collect photography books, and one section of books that I have are books of photography collections. And for me, it's really exciting to look at the themes that hold a collector's body of objects together. And I think that for me, an exhibit of a collector's photographs, or Bill Hunt's in last year that I saw, you get an entirely different sense. You get the person that you're reading through the photographs. You've got the relationship between the photographs that is a relationship that was identified by the collector. So I think it's the best way to see a collection is one body of one collector's stuff.
I think, yeah. I mean, personally, I think there were two. You asked the very first question you asked was about like how we began, and I think there were two. I had collected snapshots very haphazardly over the years, and then I saw two exhibitions. One at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which was Thomas Walter's. I think it was their first ever snapshot collection show, and it was the first time, maybe because a major museum had like ratified that it was actually okay to do what I was doing or whatever, that I sort of looked at these images and was like, oh my god, I could see what this could become, this little like dime store thing that I was doing, suddenly like, oh, this actually is a way of looking at the world that might be valid to explore. So I think that was for me very important. That exhibition was a huge moment where I actually sort of made some sort of like inner commitment to move forward. And then there was another exhibition, I think it was roughly around the same time, was an exhibition at the International Center for Photography in New York called Just Friends, which was an exhibit of 19th century vernacular photography that visually illustrated intimate physical relationships between people essentially of the same sex, largely male couples, but not exclusively. But that was sort of divorced from our notions of sexuality and homosexuality and stuff like that. And it was also, I thought it was beautifully presented, and it was a very powerful show. For a gay man, it was a very powerful show. And it was, again, a way of looking at things in a formal context that had real kind of power. Talking about Peter Cohn, we spoke over lunch. The Metropolitan Museum just bought some of Peter's work, and they displayed it in a very kind of
haphazard.
dare I say, cheap manner, which I don't think served the photographs very well. I think you need some, especially if you're dealing with individual images and you're not dealing with typologies, like these are people or pictures with cats, okay? But if you're dealing with I think you need some space around the image, kind of like what is given here, that you need to be able to look at the image on its own terms. And so that's my 2 cents. It's not much of a 2 cents. I guess what I'm saying is it can be done successfully, but I have not the faintest clue how you go about it.
Well, it's a process. It's an evolving process because snapshots are becoming the thing that they're hot right now. You know, their museums are snapping them up. There are collections being shown, and they're going to figure out the best ways to show them. And I think at some point it'll be standardized in some way, that it'll be nice and it'll be a setup that everyone's comfortable with. But right now it's in its infancy. I mean, snapshots are going away. These things are fading away. They're not 20 years from now. It's going to be hard to get snapshots. It's getting hard now. I think you said something about that.
There's an exhibit of Fitzhenry Lane paintings at the Cape Ann Museum in Gloucester right now. It features his paintings and objects from the time, furniture and other things, in the gallery space with the paintings. And I've never thought of this before you asked the question, but oftentimes if you just take the 50s or snapshots from the 50s, it would be very easy to combine the snapshots in a space with objects from the 50s. It would sort of give them a relationship to the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's, you know, particularly at the museum and at the Museum of Fine Arts, we have an encyclopedic collection, and for us, one of our goals is to represent the entire history of the medium. And so when you think about sort of, you know, we've talked a little bit about utilitarian object, and so to sort of find ways of integrating that in, I think it is a question of experimentation now, because snapshots are relatively, you know, they're hot and they're new, and there's many exciting ways that one could show them. But I agree that this is a successful way to, you know, really help people to remember that these are precious little objects that were so, you know, personal to people, and sort of think about the life of,
and Bill
of the
had
image.
I mean, I stole this from you, but Bill had a big show of his collection at the George Eastman House in Rochester, New York, and he had those little digital picture frames. Am I right? This big, and they had like I don't know how many images you had on, and they were on a loop, and they were on for 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, and it was an amazing way of seeing snapshots. I thought it was just like a simple but genius way of showing snapshots. You could really get to. They had like a vibrancy in that format, which was also great, and they were all kind of roughly filling whatever space that was.
I was happy with that.
As you should have been.
I did a thing at Eastman House, but I was not as happy with it, but I'd done it in Amsterdam at Foam and was really happy with it. I had snapshot that these funny rooms architecturally, and there was this room that was really hard to hang. So I put snapshots in on construction paper with plexiglass over it. That was fine, and I put them on photo corners, and it looked like some weird surrealist scrapbook, that hitherto unknown surrealist scrapbook. And then I had taken a dozen of the pictures and scanned them well, and had hundreds of reproductions made. And there's still these interns that, rather than swearing, they just used my name, because they had to cut them out with deckled edge scissors. And so there was like Felix Gonzalez Torres. The idea was that you came in and there was this mound of photographs on the table, and hopefully the museum person, the goer, went like, oh my God, are we supposed to touch them? Not only were you supposed to touch them, you could take them, because we'd stamped on the back. And the museum reported that for months they would find these photographs coming out of the bathroom walls. They would be, they'd been wedged in cracks in the building. And I went, that's great, that has a long life. But I like the idea of confronting the museum goer, their metabolism, that I don't, everything's, they come in, they go like, oh, good, okay, where do you want to eat? I think that Felix Gonzalez Torres was genius at stopping people and confronting them with, how do I behave with this simple idea. And so, and I think the digital picture frame did that. It dealt with it flew in the face of my own impatience looking at pictures, because you go like, okay, oh, here's another one. Oh shit, here's another one. So, but you couldn't touch it.
Couldn't touch them.
I like the touching
Right, the
thing.
But you can't touch them, yeah.
And at Eastman House, the table was way too big, and you come in, and people would have put them all like a big game of concentration. They just couldn't leave it as some random pile. They had to bring some order to it. So I'd go in and mess them up.
Right. And
So I loved Stacy's table.
yeah, I love Stacey's table too. It's pretty great. Which reminds me of the piece that I was talking about earlier with this sort of mass of printed out photographs from the internet. And it is definitely a trend in contemporary art and photography today to actually see artists that are using snapshots in their work. And I would be curious to hear if any of you have been drawn to that work, if you have particular opinions. You know, there's Eric Kessels, who is doing this printing out, but also who's doing huge installations where he'll have an enormous, you know, those blocks that there used to be where you could put a photograph on each side, the plastic blocks, or, you know, he has just done larger than life snapshot installations. And there's an exhibition at Pier 24 in San Francisco right now called Secondhand, where, you know, many artists are using snapshot and vernacular imagery in their contemporary work. So as a trend, I would love to hear your specific experiences, whether you're drawn to that work or if you have thoughts on it.
I personally tend not particularly. I mean, the appropriation of like popular imagery in art has been going back for, you know, a while beyond just the snapshot. But I mean, if one there's a sort of concept, I don't know if this is correct or not, of like the snapshot aesthetic, which is sort of haphazard, untutored or whatever. So then you have like Wolfgang Tillmans, which is already 20, 30 years old, and using kind of these like shots out of the airplane window, or that are sort of arranged in the kind of installation on the wall. And I have an ambivalent relationship with it, I think, in terms of my own personal feel. I mean, I think part of the thing that I like about snapshots is they are just little snapshots. They're not really masquerading as something else. And to appropriate them in other forms and other art, I think is fine, but I don't feel necessarily completely drawn to that work, I don't think.
Well, that's the Etsy crowd. They love it. The younger kids, the millennials, the ones who are on Etsy, they're taking those snapshots.
Oh, the
tearing
Etsy
it
crowd,
apart,
this is the artsy crowd.
putting them into another, the Etsy crowd.
I was like,
The Etsy crowd, no, the Etsy kids. They're just taking the snapshots apart. Related, if you look outside the window there's some altered cabinet cards by Amy.
Don't relate me to Etsy.
There you go. Which are much different from Etsy.
I was in a restaurant in North Carolina once, and the designer had taken snapshots and blown them up very big and used them as individual wheat pasted on the wall like a billboard, but they then had taken a single color of yellow through them and highlighted these family snapshots. I just thought it was gorgeous.
Yeah.
And this great simple idea that had been realized in this handsome way, and it gave the whole restaurant a contemporary feel, but at the same time you felt it was personal. You didn't feel like you were in a chain restaurant. And you see in a lot of hotels, they'll appropriate photographs and frame them, and they just look awful. So you see the gamut.
I think it's also, sorry, you were going to say something?
No.
You look like you were about to.
Yeah, you did. We were
really
chatting.
You were just chatting?
I was just saying that it might be a good time to have questions from the audience.
But you have that look.
Actually, back to appropriation of snapshots and other art forms. I think there's some great art forms that incorporate snapshots. For me, that started with an artist named Holly Roberts, who paints over snapshots, and there are others who paint over snapshots. And we have a friend, Jane Hamilton, who actually comes to visit and pours through our snapshots because she incorporates snapshots from all of us, probably Billy and everybody, into her paintings that are really spectacular.
She pay ya?
She never pays me.
She pays me.
Those hand-colored ones over there are this really funny area of where the snapshot has been appropriated by someone in the family and artified, and they really look great and dopey. So,
Then there's a classic one head cut out.
Yes.
yes.
And it would be great to get questions from the audience. I have one question that I wanted to bring up before we hear from everyone else, which Ron mentioned how there are these original snapshots by Vivian Maier on the wall. And this is, I think, you know, a good moment to make the connection between all of these, or mostly anonymous snapshots, and the Vivian Maier sort of question and story, and the story behind her photographs. And maybe, Ron, you could mention a word or two about your sort of part in that story as one of the first collectors of her work. And then we can talk about anonymity and in a larger sense before we hear from you.
How to take $300 and make it.
I'm just going to say that Vivian Maier's story is really good, but her photos are better than the story. If she didn't take such great photos, it wouldn't hold up to the story. And in relation, the reason I wanted to bring these was for Stacy's show in particular. The first time they were ever in Western Mass was to see the snapshots that are brought in by the collectors, and then the snapshots that are being recognized as the fine art and, you know, the top of the top and all the other fun stuff. Those same snapshots that are on this side of the wall, some of those are just as good as these over here. It's just how you put the story behind them and how you relate to them. If it's something that makes your heart go boom, then buy it. That's what it's all about. You know, it's those moments again. And once again, it's moments of happiness. And that's something Vivian Maier was able to capture on a daily basis. That one with the mother with the kid just kills me. Or the grandmother with the kid. It's just, you look at that, and if you're having a bad day, you ain't having a bad day anymore. And that's what snapshots are about. I guess that's it.
My line about your heart beating as a collector is, if the sound of the voice in your head that says you can't possibly afford it is drowned out by the sound of your heart beating,
Yes.
then you should buy it.
Should buy it. That's good.
a terribly risky life philosophy, especially for people like me. That's like a dealer offering me some terrible drug.
When you had the heart surgery, had you been looking at a lot of pictures?
No, not right before. Actually, I had very bad arrhythmia, and it was brought on, and it was worse when I was drinking bourbon. When I realized that I needed this major surgery after all the other stuff they tried to do, was that I was sitting next to a physician at dinner when I was having a second bourbon or something, and I told him I didn't feel well, and he went over and he felt my pulse and realized I was in big trouble. And that was the beginning of my heart thing. But to have 2 months of time to just sit and do nothing but look at your photographs is really, it's a remarkable thing, because most of us just keep buying and buying and don't have the opportunity to really study what we've acquired over the years. So I recommend heart surgery for everyone.
And do the, it's great, and I, you know, I think probably if any of you are beginner collectors or interested in starting a collection, that you've probably been inspired by all of these comments, but the passion of, you know, finding these wonderful visual moments and seizing the moment and, you know, buying photographs such as snapshots. Do people have specific questions?